Good afternoon. This is the new Pan-African show called Afreeqa with your host Qatsalawrq Seifu. Today we have a very exciting show for you. I'm going to allow our guest to actually introduce herself. Welcome.
Thank you for having me here, Qatsu. My name is Qonjit Siyum. I was born and raised in Addis, and I studied translation and interpretation in Italy and worked as an interpreter for many, many years for the UN and the African Union. And also at the same time, for about 23, 24 years, I ran an art gallery called Asni Art Gallery. And I'm a curator, a writer, an interpreter, and a mother of two.
Multi-talented young lady. Well, thank you for coming, or thank you for having us actually. We are actually having our interview at your house. Thank you again.
Welcome.
So we are going to go straight to the questions. Many of us know you in various interesting ways. How would you describe Qonjit Siyum?
That's a difficult question because I have to see myself as a third person to be able to. I'm a creative person. And as a creative person, I think what really happens is that you're always trying to find solution to questions and challenges. And I think everybody's like that anyway. It's not like a special feature in me.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I asked you that was because you are a mother, a wife, a multidisciplinary artist, an independent art curator, interpreter, and cook, as well as a business owner. Now, I don't know about the business owner. I think you've stopped that now. But how do you just juggle all these responsibilities?
I think some of us are born like that, in a sense that you feel alive when you're juggling with too many things and you're a jack of all trades, rather than just doing one thing and doing it very well and probably get, I don't know, bored?
Bored at some point.
I don't know. I've always been like that, even as a child. Like, I've gone to 2 schools at the same time or doing these things. And so it just comes natural, I think. And it makes you alive.
That's very true. Because they're so diverse and different, every single...
They are, but at the same time, there's a thread that connects them. So it's not really that they are so different that you're not dealing. It becomes difficult to deal. One feeds the other. I think that's what is happening.
Beautiful. I read an interview of yours where you stated that as an artist, you artistically explore the personal and social notions of gender, identity, loss, displacement, and memory. Could you elaborate on that?
Maybe that must have been one of the interviews I've had when I was working on a specific project that was called Threading Between the Lines, and that was my graduation work when I was doing my master's in creative practice, my MFA. And what I've done is, it's part of my practice. My practice has to do with craft, but at a conceptual level. And I spin cotton, and I use the traditional high world spindle. And through that, it's very meditative. I never spin to create afterwards some cloth, but it's just the act of spinning that brings in everything. So as a woman, and then I'm exploring issues of being a woman and how you occupy space within this world, within your culture, within your skin. And at the same time, I write. And when I write, it could be, for example, this threading between the lines was through the story of my grandmother, because while I was she must have left a couple of years before I started the project. So through her life and through my life and through my mother's life, 3 generations, there are so many things you can explore. Motherhood, like I said, gender, but it's also about social system, political system, because none of us are really exempt from any of these things. So that's how I work. I need to meditate in order to create, and then creating a line in time and space gives me the opportunity to think and also to allow things to happen. So between the writing and also a lot of conceptual photography happens. Mm-hmm. So this is how I do my exploration.
Beautiful explanation. I'm going to go to my next question. Now, this next question has something to do with your interpreter. Can you describe interpreting? As an interpreter, have you ever heard something that you've never interpreted?
Well, that happens very
right?
often.
I didn't know if you're allowed to even have that conversation.
Interpretation is very, very, very interesting as work because it's kind of crazy because you're speaking at the same time when your speaker is delivering the speech in another language, and you're, literally at the same time doing it.
With another language.
With another language, yeah, and with that speed. And you have to do all the thinking and the processing, everything as you go along. And it's kind of crazy, but very interesting. And, there's a lot of adrenaline just going. Yeah. If I have interpreted things that I've never heard of, well, it happens very often, but you get it from the concept or from the discourse, what it could be. But so it's not just one word.
I have to interrupt because I think you misunderstood my question. What I'm trying to say is, if you have heard something, like, especially now that you said it's simultaneously is when you're actually interpreting.
Yeah.
So if the person that you're interpreting is saying something that is making you feel like this should not be interpreted.
That happens, especially, it has a lot to do with cultural connotations. And if I can give an example, was I think 1 year when the HIV/AIDS Day was being celebrated at the end of December, there was a conference at the UNECA, and it was on education, and there were a lot of teachers who came from all the regions, and it was a very sensitive issue to translate into Amharic, because within our culture certain things are taboo to say. And so we had these difficulties, and with my colleagues it was also kind of a competition, which one of us would manage to circumvent what is supposed to be said, parts of the body in Amharic which we don't say, or even now, I find it difficult
to say.
Yeah, and so sometimes it turned out to be quite funny to say certain sexual acts, to translate them into Amharic, because people were giving papers based on their research findings, and it can happen.
It can happen. Can you say a few words about living abroad as an African while in school abroad? Have you been ever racially provoked?
That's an interesting question. I lived abroad a very, very long time ago, and I come from Ethiopia, so we don't grow up being completely conscious about racial issues because we're too proud of ourselves and what we've been told. Everything that we've been taught was like we were great, Well, we weren't colonized, and we've got the Nile, we've got the Ras Dashen and all that, and all the history and the Italians. So you're not going around, I'm sure it must have happened to you too, you don't go around being completely aware of the skin color and being African if anything happens. So you don't translate everything that happens to you through that lens to start with. And second, fortunately for me, I studied at the School of Interpretation and Translation in Italy, the university in Trieste, where it was a small town and there wasn't much of it. And there was also I was quite lucky because there were very few of us there, and it was, I don't know if you're aware of the Benetton, that was the first one that came up with young black models, for their advertisements and all, and you just become like, when they see you, that's what they relate to, and so it was very difficult. But now, whenever I travel, I'm fully aware of it, and things have changed even in that city, let alone, because there's a lot of happening that, and I think it has also to do with now the access of information, news, and people dealing with the issue. So, but personally, that anything that happened to me because I was black, I don't know, I've never lived in the US.
I guess US is different, isn't it?
I think it's different, and yeah, and I haven't, lived and worked in the UK either, or in France. So I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. It does exist, and
it didn't happen to you
personally. That
lucky.
I could, yeah, I was quite lucky. So, and then also being, someone who works with languages and who works with art, the way you're navigating the world is different. But I think what really helps is like where you grew up and how you grew up gives you that strength as well.
It does, and for some reason it also puts something over you, because I had the same experience, meaning I didn't have that same experience, but being an Ethiopian living abroad, I never realized there was such thing as race. Meaning, I never saw anybody differently than myself till it was done to me. And then I didn't quite get it either till another African American actually had to point it out to me. The reason why that person didn't do this is because you are this. And I'm like, excuse me? And I had to go back and confront that person.
Yeah, and you probably thought like the guy was just a bad person.
Exactly.
It's a negative person who's doing that, so you don't realize it. But I want to mention that for me and for many of us abroad in the 80s was the famine issue. And like when you say you're Ethiopian, and then automatically the Band-Aid and are your parents okay? And then also they make that distinction because you're coming from a country where everybody is starving. And then they create that kind of status for you.
It's quite hard, especially once you realize that you weren't accepted or nobody wanted to talk to you because of your color. For us especially, it takes us back. It kind of goes, did that just happen? Because, living in Ethiopia, you're raised with both. It's not like you were so isolated that you never got to see anybody else outside of Ethiopians. So when you actually go abroad and you're still in that same circle, let's say, because they're all different people, when you still get hit with that racial comment, or let's leave it at a comment, it still takes you a while. Is all I'm trying to say.
I think it has a lot to do with being Africans. It's not just Ethiopia. You're coming. There are like 53 countries, and we don't define ourselves with the skin color.
Exactly.
A Nigerian is a Nigerian, and that's how you navigate the world. An Ethiopian, it's the same. So it's when you go abroad in Europe and in North America that the first thing that defines you becomes the dark color of your skin. And I think that's why it takes a lot of time for us to figure it out, because we're Ethiopians, or we're Nigerians.
We were never exposed.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
So why and when did you decide to move back home, and what encouraged you to open Asni Gallery?
What made me come back? Frankly speaking, I come from the Derg era. I grew up during the Derg era. I never wanted to leave, but we had to leave, and I was one of them who left. What made me want to come back? I've always wanted to come back. So as soon as there was the opportunity, I think in 1991 there was a change of regime, and by January 1992,
you were back.
I was back, and then I started looking for a job, and for 2 years I worked in a place called Pawe, which is now it's within Benishangul, but at the time it was within Godjam, and it's like 60 kilometers from the border with Sudan. And then, for me, coming back wasn't an issue, and there were very few of us from my generation who had come back and settled right away. And I loved living with my grandmother, and it was home. Wherever you go, it was home. So that wasn't difficult. Why I opened the gallery? It just happened. It just happened, as in, it all started because there was this very old house that belonged to a nobility called Afreeqa Lahun, and somehow I ended up renting it, and it had 11 rooms. It was big, and then I was thinking, like, I'm a translator, but what could I do? And then the one thing that was missing, I saw in the 90s, was there weren't contemporary art exhibitions taking place here. And the only place that did something that was not very traditional or very exotic or very religious exhibitions was, at the time, there was a director called Champo at the Alliance. And every Tuesday they had a new exhibition, but it didn't last. And then I thought, like, this would be the right place to do it. So it was just a challenge with myself. So that's how I started, yes, while still working as a translator and interpreter, to fund the gallery. And the main concept for me was, okay, we have our even national budget that is affected by aid. And then let's see in the arts and culture sphere if there's any possibility for me to run it without ever asking for funds or any kind of aid, and then see what happens. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I ran it for 23, 24 years with a little budget. I mean, it wasn't a big place, but somehow it attracted a lot of people, and so many things happened.
Obviously, it's the next question is going to be, where's Asni today?
I really love this question because I get asked all the time for the past 3-4 years. And I find it very fascinating. Like, Asni, physically speaking, it doesn't exist, but mentally, emotionally, it still does. And it still makes sense, and there's no separation from it. What happened to it? I think everything has its own life cycle, and I opened it in 1996.
Wow.
In the old house, and at the time, like, that was the very first initiative, taking a historical house and turning it into a public space. And then also providing this kind of service where, for me, the main point was to have a local audience, to build a local audience, because the foreign cultural institutes like the Alliance, Italian Cultural Institute, or the Goethe were mainly attracting at the time the expat community, and which was wonderful. But for me, it was art for us, and so that was how it all started. And then I have been to different venues, including the park near the French embassy, and it's called Faransai Park, and that had also a different kind of setting where there was a lot of artistic initiatives took place. And Asni wasn't just an art gallery. It was more like a cultural center where everything happened, from music to performance to exhibitions to art classes and women's programs, and food, of course, a lot of food. And then there was a time when I wanted to experiment with the space, and that was when all these high rises started coming up and commercial centers. So I went to Getu Commercial Center and then opened, while I still had my gallery, a very small space between lingerie shop and mobile phone shop, and to see, to also kind of interact with the audience, what kind of audience is coming, what is happening. And then one of the major spaces that I used was Lafto Mall while it was still under construction, and to take up that whole space and turn it completely, from A to Z into an art space where I think I created like 13 galleries, and then also used the swimming pool area. It was all under construction, and then even the cinemas turned into video showcasing places. And so Asni has been evolving. And then there was the Arat Kilo space. What happened to it? I think as long as I'm alive, I don't think anything has happened to it. What has happened is, like, it has evolved, and everything has its own cycle. It comes and it goes, and I'm just waiting now what Asni wants.
What's next?
Yeah, so that's what it is.
So now we're going to come to the food. If anybody does not know about Konjit and food, you're about to find out. How do you see and use food? Can you use food and nutrition as a means to address social, economic, and political issues?
Definitely. Food is political, of course.
Right.
It has always been part of my artistic practice. And it's through food, like through spinning, through food, I've always tried to express what I want to say or try and address some issues. As far as the gallery was concerned, I cooked once a week in the old days, and I only cooked vegetarian food, whether, and the reason why, and then afterwards, through time, the last venue I had a separate cafe and restaurant, and the food was vegetarian. The reason why it was vegetarian wasn't to be trendy or anything. For me, it was to bring people together, irrespective of their religion or beliefs or anything. Then you could come
and
around.
Eat together.
Yes, and eat together. And in terms of my artistic practice, I've used it also to raise social issues. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, there was a time when I conducted a research in hospitals, and for me, it's still a mystery to me why hospital food has to be really bad when it's there that we really need it most, as part of medication and also as part of making the patient feel that they're being taken care of.
Right.
And yet, it's not a phenomenon that happens only in Ethiopia, but even in the Western world where they're really advanced, and I've also been in one of the hospitals, food is not given that much importance. So one of the researches I did was at the Emmanuel Hospital, where I cooked and stayed with in the kitchen for a few months and came up with and studied the menu. And I went around also looking at other hospitals and to see what can be done. And fortunately for me, I went back a few years later and I saw at Emmanuel, they've made some changes in terms of what to give and how to do it. And I think it was in 2018 or 19, I was even asked, I was even invited by the Ministry of Health to kind of work with a group that was looking into the food aspect of hospitals. And also I've done a lot of performances in terms of how we could include fresh vegetables and fruits, and also really understand, even though we don't have money, that doesn't mean we can't feed people well. It's about management, and then also in many hospitals, it happens that you're getting pasta with tomato sauce and a piece of bread, and then how do you make it nutritious, and when do you feed your patients? So I've been working around it, and even my artistic practice has been going through that. And apart from that, for instance, when there was a time when we had, I think it was some festival and conference, I don't remember exactly the title of it, but it had to do with the Nile Basin countries. And then my performance had to do inviting the Nile Basin countries, the major ones like Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, those people who came to participate, to ask them to cook together. And I chose lentils because I think the Egyptians called their city Misr. And I thought Misr must have come from there. And then so we cooked together and then discussed. And if you come, in Amharic there's the expression ka'andwans. So if we are from one river, so there's no frontier. And so these some of the things that I've been
That's very
doing.
nice.
Or creating these events whereby you have to share your food and insist on how we do it is already there. We don't need to invent anything. Our injera is a circle one, and then you have to eat it together, and you're eating it with your hand, which means also it has that tactile aspect of it. And then, of course, we're feeding each other also with the gursha. So these things need to be really thought through as a means to address whether it's political or social or economic issues.
So it'd be interesting to see them now, because like now after the COVID, after 2019, a lot of the things that we're used to doing, we are not really supposed to do. And one of them being eating together. You know what I mean? So especially when you go to the hospitals, this aspect, I think they need more than we outside people need. This togetherness, this eating together, hugging, kissing. So how do you think they've been able to cope, especially at Emmanuel? How are they able to cope? If they're in the same hospital, they're all together, so it's okay for them to eat together. But now with this situation, this eating together, because I think it's one of our most important aspects of our culture, the eating together part. You know, and like you said, gursha. You know, all of this, how do you think that has affected, this is overall, as humans, how it has affected all of us that usually used to do all of those things together, psychologically?
I think this is a phenomenon that has affected everybody worldwide, and it's very difficult for me, you know, to really speak about one hospital or anything, because and I haven't been there for quite a while, so I haven't been close enough to tell you exactly what happened. But our culture is like that. We eat together and we feed each other, but we have also come to learn through modern life to eat on separate plates, and whether it's in a hospital or at a wedding, you're not eating together, you know, it's on your plate. I don't think it changes us, like what has happened with COVID, because it's part and parcel of your being, the way you deal with food. But at a human level, of course, it's been very, very difficult, drastic. It's not just about the food, you know, nobody even comes close to you, or we don't go close to each other. And I think that's not just at the level of food, but I think it's not about the culture that we are practicing. It's on a human level for all of us. I mean, I've had COVID, and for 2 weeks I had to be isolated, and then, but I was lucky enough, like it wasn't really bad because I had already had even the booster.
What are the impacts of neocolonialism and globalization on African standards of living? Can we give an example of neocolonialism on Ethiopian coffee production?
Yeah, in terms of coffee and its history and how it's happening, it has always fascinated me. It's like any other product, like if it's cocoa or coffee, you know, anything that comes from here, from Africa, and then how it's used. For example, not just how much a cup of coffee costs, but the tradition, the culture of coffee. If you go to Europe, and I'm just taking an example, like even in Italy, they're known for their coffee, but they don't produce coffee, but they can take it to a different level. And then when you see the relation, you know, with Ethiopia, fortunately for us, I think it started in the 90s, and then especially from the 2000 onwards, that it's acknowledged as Ethiopian coffee.
Okay.
I remember when I was a student in Italy, all coffee came from Brazil, which was not true, because I used to give Amharic lessons to the Italian man from the Illy coffee company, who used to come and get coffee from here. So they had found me, and I was giving Amharic lessons to the man, but it was never acknowledged or mentioned in
their pamphlet.
Yeah,
anyway.
Because coffee was coming from Brazil, and then also like the mentality at the time was, you know, this was just a poor country, and there was famine. So it starts with that, and then we know about what happened with Starbucks, and on one hand, it's very beautiful that now, you know, Ethiopian coffee is everywhere, and you see it packed and all that. But what is the really happening? Has it really? It's our gold, but has it really changed our economic status? Right. Do we really have the power to negotiate and fix the price and make it that is not affected by how the European and the Western market defining it. But it's the same, you know, whether it's gold, whether it's diamond, whether it's coffee, whether it's cocoa. How come, you know, it's Switzerland that produces the best chocolate or Belgian chocolates, but where does it come from? And it's the same thing with coffee. So, and then we're supposed to be the country where coffee comes from, but how far have we come? Yeah, how far have we taken it? And can we really determine the market? So history has it the same way as it had it before.
So nothing has really changed currently?
Well, like I said, it's recognized, but you know, I'm not the specialist and I'm not an economist and I don't know. But yeah, it's we're known for our coffee, but it hurts to see also, like, you know, it's this whole thing about fair trade and we're being helped, and you know, your coffee has a special section.
Exactly.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be any coffee without our coffee. Think about it.
I know.
I don't know if I made sense.
So, my dear Konjit, this is going to be our last question. Can African artists be enabled to find a global audience and a customer base without any middleman?
What do you mean when you say middleman? Who are you thinking of?
The middleman being, how do you say it?
Art dealer, gallery, what?
I guess
Curator?
it's an art, no, it's either an art dealer. How would you say a dallala? Because usually there's always a middleman. It's not the artist and the buyer that actually meet.
Yeah.
For the most part, an artist, if I wanted to buy, for me, if I don't know you personally and say, okay, Konjit, I'm ready to invest in one of your pieces, so me and you communicate. But usually there's another person that's behind you that I have to communicate with to buy your art, your pieces.
Well, first of all, I think that applies for any trade these days.
Even in a house.
If you're buying your shirt, it's not like you're going and then you're getting it from the person who produced it or from the maker.
Yeah.
When it comes to art, it's quite complicated because there's a system, a structure, and how it works, and the politics of it. So there is this tendency of thinking like the artist can be, which is true also, partly it's true, is exploited because there is someone in between or a system in between. And then there's this idea that if those people or if those systems weren't in the middle, then the artist would get more or life would be different. But that doesn't work like that. Any business or anything that we do, you don't go and buy it from the factory.
No, you don't.
Okay? But art has a different system. Who is controlling the market is another issue. And who defines what art is and which country. Like, for instance, in our case, in the Ethiopian art and the African art, when I started, those who were really promoting from, Africans. Anyway, for your question, it's a whole system. Currently, the art market, the Western art market, is also focusing on art from Africa and the diaspora. It had been before from Asia, and before that, it's no longer just from the West.
Right.
So that's an opportunity at this, but for the African artist or the Ethiopian artist to be on world stage, you need all that system that works. And so I think it's quite complex. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. But then you made it clear, because for most of the things that we do, we do need somebody that's going to help us. A perfect example is for a band, music band. Okay. They don't go deal with people. They always have somebody that actually does that for them. And also in an artist case, an artist is an artist. An artist cannot go and talk about business. Sometimes they might just end up handing them the art instead of taking them. You see what I'm saying? They're more interested in people loving their pieces as opposed to more interested in, exchanging money. I think you explained.
If an artist is working in the studio, if it's a studio artist, and there is the business part of it also to deal with, because even when they're dealing with their dealers, it's a business part that they're dealing with.
True.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very true. So today we had a beautiful time, Konjit. Thank you so much for actually inviting us to your beautiful home, and so we could have this great conversation. So, and if there's any last words you want to say?
Well, I just want to thank you for such an opportunity, and keep doing what you're doing, and I think that's very important.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.